This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, we'll get started. So just to go through a few logistics before we get started, please keep your microphones muted and your webcam off, except for the webcams of the presenters. And presenters, please keep your microphones muted as well when you're not speaking. This just helps to cut down on any background noise. You can type any questions into the chat box that you'll see on the top right corner of your screen during the presentation, and Nazifa and I will be keeping an eye on those so that we can make sure that the presenters can address your questions. And like I said before, we'll be making a recording of the presentation. It's now recording, and we'll be sending this to all the participants. So now I'm going to hand it over to Cheryl Thomas, Executive Director of Global Rights for Women. And if you could go ahead, Cheryl.
Yes, thank you so much, Laura and Nazifa, for coordinating all this and making this possible with our technology. And welcome to all of you. We're here in the States and around the world. We're just really delighted that you can join us. Familiar names, some unfamiliar, just a little bit of background about who we are. Global Rights for Women works around the world with partners and here in Minnesota to advance women's and girls' human right to be free from violence through legal reform and systemic and institutional change. So we have worked in dozens of countries with both advocates who are trying to get new laws on violence against women, and then once those laws are in place, to enforce them effectively. We do trainings on coordinated community response with partners around the world and consultations on risk assessments and fatality reviews and all kinds of promising practice in building the legal system's ability to better protect victims of violence and hold offenders accountable. So that's just a little bit about Global Rights for Women. And now I would love to introduce our panelists. I'll just say a couple words about myself first. As I mentioned, I'm the director of Global Rights for Women and have worked in the women's human rights field for about 25, 26 years. I started back in 1992 before the United Nations ever declared women's rights are human rights and violence against women is a human rights violation. So it's been thrilling to see the progress that's happened around the world and the new laws and the new attention in the legal system to private forms of violence like domestic violence that we'll be talking about today a lot. I was also the director of our local court watch organization, Women at the Courthouse, that monitored in the courts, sitting in the courts with red clipboards to see how the courts were handling cases of violence against women and children. Years ago, that was a huge education for me to be there and watch that. So I'm an attorney and just really grateful for the opportunity to be working on this issue most of my career. Steve Aycock, Judge Steve Aycock, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Steve Aycock. I'm the Chief Judge for the Tribal Court for the Colville Confederated Tribes. It's a Native American tribe in the state of Washington. This is my second term as Chief Judge. I was there in the 90s and early 2000s for 9 years. I was then the judge in residence at the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, which is a judicial organization in the United States. And through that, I did a lot of training around the country on domestic violence issues, both to courts and to other stakeholders and advocates, prosecutors, and others. In addition to helping write up some of the publications that the National Council has provided. The last several years, a lot of my work has been in Indian country in the United States, working on prosecution of non-Indian domestic violence perpetrators on Indian reservations. And I've also had the opportunity to work for Global Rights for Women in Moldova last summer. So welcome, everybody.
So let's go to Iluta Lace from Latvia.
Hello, good evening from Latvia. I'm women's rights activist and director of Marta Centers. Marta Centers is a non-governmental organization that I established 20 years ago with like-minded people. And Marta Centers advocates for women that suffer from domestic violence. We provide support, psychological, social, legal support. We support them during the litigation process, and also we look for best practices for all the stakeholders involved to support women and serve women for their best interests, including courts.
Thank you, Iluta. Judge Ilze Celmina.
Good evening from Latvia. I am judge in Riga Regional Court. For the last 10 years, I have been working in the civil division.
I think we have lost Ilse's sound, or is that just me? Laura, can you hear it, Ilse?
Yes, Ilse, yeah, thank you. You're on again.
In addition, I am teacher in Judicial Training Center. The subjects of my lectures are on family law and civil procedure, and especially on the procedure for issuing a protection order against domestic violence. Before I participated in the working group that drafted amendment to the civil procedure law on the implementation of the temporary protection order against violence in Latvia in 2014. At the invitation of Global Rights for Women, I participated in the seminar Coordinate Community Response Against Domestic Violence DOS model in 2016.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. And Dusan Radakovic from Kosovo, which I failed to put on our panelist slide. Could you introduce yourself, Dusan?
Yes, thanks for the presentation. I think it's very important to be the part of this webinar. My name is Dusan Radakovic. I am from Kosovo. We are the youngest country in Europe. I'm actually from the Serbian community. I'm living in the north part of Kosovo. Somebody who works in politics knows about the problematic part of the Kosovo. I'm director established from 2011, the NGO called Advocacy Center for Democratic Culture, and we are working a lot from the beginning. We are all of us. We have more than 20 people staff working a lot on pre-legal aid, protection on the victims, working with the courts, working with the prosecutor office, working a lot on domestic violence cases, on the pre-legal aid, property rights, lots of things, transparency of the court, anti-corruption programs, but majority of things working on pre-legal aid and to help the people who have, problems in a court. And it's a pleasure to be the part of that and to answer the questions. I saw a lot of people from all over the world here. And it's a pleasure to be the judge here. I'm every day cooperate with different judges, president of the court, police, social welfare center, ombudspersons, a lot of institutions who directly cooperate to, in this pandemic period, try to small percentage of the especially domestic violence cases, who is actually all over the world is increased, and to work on that to protect the victims and to protect to have a normal life.
Wonderful, thank you, Dusan. And Erin Osborne. And let's make sure we just folks know that Dusan is from Kosovo, and just back on the panelist list there. Erin Osborne, let's go to you next.
Good morning. My name is Erin Osborne. I'm a staff attorney at Central Minnesota Legal Services. We are a free civil legal aid organization serving people who are living at or below poverty level in Hennepin County, where Minneapolis is, and also Anoka County, which is a slightly more suburban rural community just north of the Twin Cities. We have a partnership with the Domestic Abuse Service Center in Hennepin County, and the service center is located at the courthouse. Petitioners can go there for advocacy services, connection to shelters, filing petitions for orders for protection, and then they also have law enforcement located there, probation officers, and prosecutors. And then as of last year, through our partnership, we've added civil legal services. So I provide on-site advice when people are in crisis and they just need to know, what are my options? What can I do? And then we also take cases for referral, for representation, in orders for protection, and then providing holistic services long-term, because oftentimes the legal needs don't end with the protective order. We do represent in family court cases for custody, dissolution, and a lot of housing cases come up as well.
Thank you, Erin. We're not able to see you. I don't suppose by chance you turned off your...
Let me see if I can...
There you are.
There it is.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Erin. That's the person who was just talking. Okay. Excellent. Thank you all. I'm so grateful to these panelists for joining us during this hugely busy time in our world and during this crisis when everybody is really scrambling to try to figure out how to change their roles and their jobs. I will just give a little background here before we bring in more of the insights and the expertise of the panelists. For all of you online, many of you I know have heard violence against women called a pandemic. Certainly before the COVID-19 crisis was upon us, and now certainly that is true more than ever. A pandemic within a pandemic. The COVID crisis is exacerbating the harm caused to women through domestic violence. The gendered impacts of coronavirus have been acknowledged by the United Nations in the way it harms women in just many, many different ways. We certainly, those of us who've worked in the domestic violence field for so long, know how isolation in the home is used as a tactic of power and control by abusers, and that's certainly happening now and making victim survivors more vulnerable than ever. Isolation is used to control and frighten and cut off helplines to victims, and now also being used as a scare tactic by abuser. According to the National Domestic Violence Hotline, that is being reported by many victims who are calling in there. Just a couple statistics from Minnesota, and I'm sure you all have your own. During the first week of our stay-at-home order here in Minnesota, 2/3 of police calls were domestic violence related. That's quite an increase. I just talked to a colleague in northern Minnesota yesterday who reported not only an increased incidence of domestic violence there, but increased severity of harm, physical harm, serious felony level harm. In one day, there were 7 arrests, and 6 of them were domestic violence, and not only, as I say, an increase, but in more serious harm. Multiple countries around the world are reporting this same dynamic. I was reading just this morning that France has come out with a new report, 30% increase in domestic violence reports between March 17th and March 28th. In Argentina, there's been a 25% increase in domestic violence calls. So a really serious pandemic within a pandemic, as we say. So we can go on. Yeah, there we go. Thankfully, the awareness has grown as the shutdown and lockdown has continued. There's more and more media and leaders speaking out about that. The governor of Minnesota, for example, has issued public statements about shelters being open and the importance of legal system intervention. We were delighted to see a good example up in Duluth, Minnesota, where the police chief right away made a public statement, very public statement, that it will not be a free-for-all for perpetrators of sexual and domestic violence during COVID, and that law enforcement is aware of the increased danger and will be acting on it and stepping up to really make sure that victim survivors are protected. Not all leaders are quite so aware. We were really disappointed to see the harmful message by our US president when asked during a press conference about harm to domestic violence victims during COVID-19. He shrugged his shoulders and said, well, these are the costs. I'll go to you, Iluta. I understand that you had a conversation with the Ministry of Interior there, that oversees the police in Latvia.
Yes, today our Minister of Interior also made a strong statement acknowledging that we have 30% increase of emergency calls in cases of domestic violence. He stated that he urged every person that suffers from violence not to fear and turn for help and request protection orders. And he also acknowledges that in media we can read that police deals with issues of measures regarding emergency state issues, and that these are not taken into account, but it's so that police doesn't look at domestic violence as secondary crime, and that all perpetrators will be held accountable.
And how did that happen, Iluta? It was your initiative, wasn't it?
I encouraged.
Okay.
Because we also see that the cases that women that turn to us, they report really cruel cases, like real cruelty, severe violence, and we cannot be ignorant to this. We have to act.
Thank you, Iluta. And I think, Steve, something happened with leaders speaking out in your state too. Is that correct?
Yes, the tribal leadership yesterday issued a statement and indicated in the statement that domestic violence victims seeking safety was a priority, and that they should go ahead and try to do so. Also, just following up on your comment about the number of arrests, I was looking at our arrest records, and it looks like out of the last, we don't have a huge number of criminal cases every year, but out of the last 10 arrests, 5 of them have been battery charges on either intimate partners or other family members. So we're also seeing an increase in violence in the homes.
Just the reports are coming in very consistently around the world in a country like this, that increase. Okay, thank you for that, Steve. We can go on to the next slide here, Laura. So I think, just again, for context, it's very important to keep in mind at this time the core goals of all legal system intervention in domestic violence cases. And it's really been so recent that we have acknowledged domestic violence as a community, a crime against the community. And so important now that we not kind of slip back, I think, to the days when domestic violence was considered a private matter, as we all remain in the homes. This is just a really ironic kind of circumstance where just when we've made this progress to engage legal systems in the United States, it's been happening for a longer time, I think, than probably most countries, but still we struggle with domestic violence being seen as a private matter so much around the world, and we are so at risk of that continuing now. So that community commitment, I think, that leaders are expressing is really important. Safety and accountability, just those fundamental core goals require both criminal and civil justice systems to intervene. and we will be talking about both of those aspects of the justice system today. Just a quick comment about civil protector orders during importance of civil protectors orders during the COVID crisis. We talked a lot about this last week in part 1 of our webinar series on courts. They will remain, as they have been, one of the most important legal remedies that victim survivors have access to around the world, in that they are, can be quickly issued and don't have many of the time delays that criminal justice systems have so often. We have heard already from judges, and courts should all be alert to a decline in applications for protection orders, being aware that victims may not be able to apply for these orders due to the oppressive circumstances that they are living in their homes. Some of the advocates are concerned that they can't work well with victims remotely, and this is discouraging victims from applying. To the extent, we can go to the next slide, that existing laws and new emergency policy allows, courts should be thinking about exploring ways to ease the application for orders for protection, hold meaningful hearings if courts are closed and restricted, and extend emergency orders possibly past any short deadlines for emergency orders that are so often the case in the laws around the world. In our work at Global Rights for Women, we know that so often those emergency orders can only last for 24 or 48 hours, and that can be even a more dangerous situation during this time, during the COVID crisis, if they expire and the hearing can't be held for the longer term. And we'll hear more from Steve about this a little later. In the criminal courts, we are going to be facing many challenges. In the criminal courts, accountability, that's where our accountability lies, that with our criminal systems, the accountability for abusers can happen just in a way that it can't happen with our civil processes. So this is going to make a difference if we can ensure that our criminal processes are effective in these times, but that's obviously going to present challenges. We can go to the next slide there too. These are just some of the challenges that we are going to face, that we already are facing with domestic violence cases in the criminal courts. The fear from, I've learned from New York, the arrests are not resulting in detention in the pre-trial stage as much as they were before the COVID crisis, because of the very legitimate fear of the virus in prisons, and the fear that victim survivors are expressing about arresting offenders when their lives will be at stake due to the lack of protections in prison. So let's hear now more from our experts. I would like you all to think about, and I know you already have, to address this question first in a general way for our participants, just giving them an idea of how the general court processes have changed during COVID. What's different in your courts with the restrictions have been imposed, and maybe just describe generally how it contrasts to before COVID and now during the crisis, and let's first not focus so much on violence against women cases, but just general. Ilze, would you like to begin?
During this COVID-19 pandemic time, Latvian courts continue to work. Of course, respecting the established security measures, women still can apply for temporary protection order either through support of police or they can send via post directly to court. If person has arrived by self at the court, they can use a special post box at the entrance as the court office does not accept visitors now. Inside going people only with special brief from court. Other way how victims can reach the court is by email. Maybe not all countries have this possibility, but in Latvian ID cards already have built inside electronic signature. That means that the victim has a possibility to send the application for temporary protection electronically, attach it to his or her email and send to court directly and stay at home and electronic way it works.
Okay, thank you, Ilze. Why don't we go to if you have questions about any of that, please be sure to put them in the chat box. And Iluta will be talking, I think, a little bit more about the challenges that changes have been presenting in Latvia. Steve, why don't we hear from you about general changes in the court system in Washington and on the tribal courts?
Yeah, so a lot of the state Supreme Court has issued several orders talking about closing down the courts to an absolute minimum, trying to keep in-person hearings to an absolute minimum. And in like, as one example, in children's cases, so in child neglect kinds of cases, they actually have said now that they think you should postpone any kind of adjudicatory or fact-finding hearings until after the courts are back open up again, just so that you don't have to have the in-person hearings. At the tribe, we're now open half a day, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday only. The people who are coming to the courthouse are actually being screened as they come into the courthouse, both for whether or not they have any symptoms, but also as to why they're there at the courthouse. And at this point, we're only taking emergency filings in person. So if it's not basically what we've said is, if you don't need the order today, then we're not going to let you in to ask for a hearing. One of the other things that we've done is we've actually been meeting on a fairly regular basis with our jail staff and prosecutors and public defenders to talk about who's in our jail. Are there any of those people that are at risk for COVID-19? So are they older, or they have underlying medical conditions? And if so, we're making special arrangements to get them out of the jail. And the jail then is also screening everyone coming in and trying to decrease the amount of in and out at the jail. So there's no in-person visitation hours at our jail right now. Again, just trying to minimize the risk of getting COVID-19 virus into the jail.
Good, great to hear that. I think that's probably a progressive thing that's taking place here, because we do hear so often about the fear of the jails and how that's impacting everybody. Thank you, Steve. Dusan, would you like to go next and just talk generally about how the overall court system has changed in Kosovo during the COVID-19 shutdown?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Laura. The situation is not really big in Washington. Generally, everybody suffers based on this. Our job is we are signing the MOU with all institutions dealing with the rule of law and also with each court in all over the Kosovo is organized by one judge in charge who is every day. Actually, every court have two judges. One judge who is dealing with the criminal code for 24 hours and one judge who is dealing with the civil code. Judge based on the domestic violence, it depends on the situation, is we're dealing with a criminal or we're dealing with a civil cases. Actually, 24 hours is we have a judge in charge who is dealing with that case. Based on the information what I got from police for the March and until the 2 days ago, double percentage, 50% more cases we have domestic violence because the people is on a stuck in a home, is on a quarantine, and a lot of people is very nervous based on this situation. I can mention to everybody if you North Mitrovica town where I live in a northern Kosovo is one of the most critical town based on the COVID, in much more percentage based on the percentage of the people COVID and based on the percentage how many people is poisoned. Definitely we are the biggest in Kosovo. For that reason, our town is fully on the curfew and we are actually from 12 o'clock during the day until the 5 o'clock in the morning we have full curfew and we're not possible going out. But we have a special permission from the police. I personally, my staff, for free legal aid, we are going everywhere to help the people who actually need legal advice for everybody. We are a legal advice case also for the municipality, but of course for the courts, we are here every day. Actually, situation is on the field. It's very bad because 50% more cases if you compare with February, when you compare with the other months, it's very big percent. We are working 24 hours to help them. Court is here, but when they call police, in one case we have a problem because police try to entrance and try to investigate, try to organize cases, but based on the decision of the Kosovo Judicial Council, the main institution who is dealing with the law says somebody who is arrested not possible to stay 24 hours because of the COVID-19, and we have regular procedures. Kind of some extreme cases where the woman is beaten, or in some extreme cases where you need help or something. In that cases, we organize the police organize arrest directly to detention center. But for the other cases, we are going to the regular procedures, and after that takes the notes from the police that people going out. If there's some cases will be going on the special houses, who is safe house for the women who need that. We organize that. A lot of cases in this situation, a lot of lawyers is not working, and we are interested with our legal aid program to help them, to advise them, to organize for legal aid, and we are very satisfied. We understand where is police in situation in this moment, we're working on a lot of things, but I think this model is good, and also it's important to judges and prosecutors recognize us to help the sides, to help the victims, and definitely we are interested and help them in every day in 24 hours.
Thank you, Dusan. Yes, I understand that is a real focus of your NGO there in Kosovo, and I'd love it if you would talk about that a little bit more later.
Okay.
Yeah, just really talk to us about how important it is that victims are receiving contact from your legal aid lawyers or advocates. And that's, as we all know, just critically during normal times. And Dusan has been able to continue that practice during COVID times too. So let's all ask you to talk about that a little bit more in depth just a little bit later. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so Erin, can you just describe how the overall court system has changed in Hennepin County here during COVID-19? And we lost your face again, so if you could make sure your camera's on, that would be great.
I think when I'm unmuting myself, it's turning off my camera.
Well, we see you, so thank you.
Okay, good. So in Hennepin County, the courts are open, but the services available at the courthouse have been reduced. Our state Supreme Court issued an order in mid-March determining which cases would be considered high priority at this time. And those cases are still moving forward, some of them in person, some of them by phone. And then other cases that are kind of in that middle ground have been made remote hearings, if possible, by phone. I don't believe our court system has video capabilities yet. And then there are some cases that they are just not scheduling hearings on at all right now. I think a few cities have done this, but we do have an eviction moratorium during the stay-at-home order. So there is no housing court right now. There are no evictions being filed. I'm anticipating a wave of evictions once that order is lifted. The rent is still due, and so we don't have rental relief at this time. So that there may be a spike in those cases after the order is lifted. Our self-help centers at the courthouse are closed for in-person meetings. So typically people can go to the courthouse, meet with someone to help them fill out the forms if they're representing themselves, but they are doing remote work. So they are working with people over the phone, and our court forms have always been available on the court website. So people do have access to court forms right now.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. That's true in Latvia too. I think the court forms are available on your website, right, Iluta?
As it was mentioned before by Ilze, that the women can, there are post boxes available at the entrance of the court, and women can submit their applications in these post boxes.
Okay, and then the application form is on your website too, right?
Yes, we have shifted our practices right now, and we also, as Marta centers, provide online consultation possibilities, but we also understand that many women refuse to have such kind of consultations online because they are under direct control of an abuser, or they cannot find a peaceful and safe place at their home to call from. Therefore, we have produced also recommendations, what to do, how to do. We have placed them on our website. We have also shared them in social media, and we have also on our website, we do have application form. We have also recommendations how to fill in this application form so that women, whenever they have this small possibility to do this, they can do this. And we also, within recommendations, we also encourage bystanders to act and to help, and we also understand this really restrictive, how to say, environment in which women are, and we encourage them to either lend their own phones or encourage them to speak with victims and provide support, and probably also encourage women to send some kind of requests of help to us through other emails, not their own, because they are under such control. So we try to find creative solutions so that anyway, regarding circumstances, they can apply and receive justice.
Okay, that's very helpful. Let's see, did I miss anybody? I think we got everyone. Why don't we go on to the next slide? We've kind of moved into this topic already. How have your court processes specifically for domestic violence cases changed due to COVID, and what has shifted in your own practice? And Iluta just gave us a great description of what they're doing at their NGO to address the increased difficulty. I'm trying to read some of the questions in the chat box too, and I'm finding it so interesting. For example, an advocate, I think it is, from Puerto Rico, says something that we were experiencing here in Hennepin County. I'm not sure we still are, Erin, but that they do have their courts open 24/7. They're working with police. They're coordinating with through video conference with police, and still they're observing a decline in the civil order for protection requests and a decline in requests for services from the shelters. So really interesting that despite the adjusting and the raising of awareness of all these interveners, there is still clearly a fear or hesitancy of victim survivors to reach out. I'm just thinking, Erin, would you like to comment on that as an advocate, and maybe you too, Dusan, comment on that as advocates in just understanding what's happening with victims, even though courts are open 24/7 and we are working with police. Erin, would you like to go first?
Yes, so we are seeing a similar issue in Hennepin County, and even though we know that the calls are increasing for help, there's still a decrease in accessing advocacy services and legal services, and we haven't seen as many people coming to us for orders for protection. I think there are a number of things that are impacting that. The isolation that people are feeling right now in their homes, they may not have a safe place to go to call us and to follow up.
I'm sorry, but would you click your video again? Thank you.
Sorry.
No worries.
There we go. Is it back?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and so they don't have a safe place to go to access our services right now. I think that's a main concern that I have. I also think we are still requiring in-person hearings for the initial hearing in an order for protection. And that's a barrier. Accessing the courthouse has always been a barrier that we've dealt with our clients. We don't offer childcare at our courthouse, but we also don't allow children to be in the hearings. And so at a time when childcare centers may be closed, people are unable to find work, their finances have been, they're losing money, they've lost money or their jobs, and they probably can't find childcare to even be able to leave the house to get to the courthouse for a hearing right now. So that's something that I hope, if, as this goes on, our stay-at-home order was extended to May 4th. I'm hoping that we can find other ways to allow people to appear remotely earlier in the process to try and just take that barrier away. And as far as our services, I'm not sure if people know that we're open or the extent that we're open. And I think it's just really hard to call and follow up right now.
Right. Thank you. I just one follow-up question on that. We have emergency orders for protection here, of course. Now, so tell us about those.
Yeah, so our order for protection statute offers pretty broad relief, and there are certain requests that you can make for, I just call it a stay away order. All you're requesting is that the other person not commit any acts of domestic abuse, stay away from your home, stay away from your work or daycare, and that they not try to contact you on either directly or through third parties. You can get an order for protection granted for 2 years on an emergency basis without having a hearing if that's all you're requesting. If you need additional relief, which people who have children in common often do need additional relief beyond that to determine temporary custody, parenting time, emergency financial issues, those hearings are still being held. That's where you would have a first appearance, and you would have to go to court for that. And then our court has been trying to schedule those hearings for emergency relief, but if they're to address those safety needs. But if there's anything beyond that, like restitution for, you know, damage to property, medical bills, things like that, they are reserving those issues so that people can come back at a later date and still ask for it, but not have to come to the courthouse right now.
Okay. Yeah, so there's a real difference between the emergency and the long-term orders, but the relief is quite a bit more limited if you get that order right away.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we go to the next slide here? I realized that Steve had mentioned something about allowing in-person filing for emergency orders and extending the full hearing. Will you address that, Steve, as part of your court practices?
Sure. So our code allows for the initial protection order to be done just on paper. So I don't need to have a hearing at that point. And unlike Hennepin County, I can grant all relief on a temporary basis, including custody of children and all of monies, anything like that I can do just on paper. It requires, what?
That's wonderful.
Oh, yeah. It requires, though, that we do have to have a show cause hearing, it's called. And so those have to be set within a certain period of time, and generally that's 20 days. So what we're trying to do is put them all off to 20 days as much as we can. The other thing we're trying to do is, even if we have to have those hearings, is to have them on the phone rather than in person. Sometimes that can be a hindrance just in terms of credibility. When you don't actually get to see the people in front of you and trying to make credibility determinations when all you have is a voice. So that is a detriment to trying to do these by phone and not in person. As I was indicating before, so the reservation is very large, and so it's larger than the state of Rhode Island. It's half the size of Kosovo. It's a tenth the size of Latvia, but it only has about 7,000 or 8,000 people. So they're spread all over the place. It's very rural. There are 3 mountain passes east to west to go from one edge of the reservation to the other. And because of that, then access to the internet and also to cell service is very spotty. And so that's actually why we're open on Mondays, is in case something has happened, people can actually come to the court and file in person for these kinds of orders. We do have our forms online, but if you don't have access to the internet, and of course, if they didn't have it at home, what they would generally have done would have been to go to one of the libraries or one of the community centers and use one of their computers. But both community centers and libraries are shut down at this time, so they don't have access there either. So we wanted to make sure that there was still an ability for people to actually come to the court, get the forms, fill them out, and get the relief that they needed on an emergency basis.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you. I'd really love to hear from Dusan and our Latvian partners, Ilze and Iluta, about emergency orders. These are clearly, you know, at least in Minnesota and Washington, becoming, you know, very important. And you can hear how Steve is adapting to making sure those emergency orders get issued and postponing the required in-person hearing as long as possible. Are there, maybe we'll go to you first, Dusan. How about the emergency orders in Kosovo? Is there such a remedy where the police or a judge can issue the order on the spot or within 24 hours based on the application of a survivor victim?
Generally, police is not a good situation. To be really open with you, it's crowd, it's mass, it's chaos. Because working on curfew, working on the
on curfew, did you say?
Yes, yes, we are on that, and on the separately in the cases for especially for the emergency work or domestic violence, the problem is a lot of especially women. It's not possible, and it's afraid to call the police based on that cases because as we are on a curfew and police have one job is not reacted based on the situation. And what is actually very bad, we are always advocate ideas to everybody who have, I know, domestic violence or meeting or threatening or everything would have immediately call the police and call the institution who is responsible for that. I tell you also the in case in Kosovo on some detention centers, some prisons, a lot of the security guys is also poisoned. The good thing is the prisoners is not poisoned, what is very good. And also the police have restricted rules to only on the some, how to say, hard cases. The cases where is the something need the medical help or something will be arrested in the fast procedures. Judges who is judge in charge immediately with prosecutor and will be proceeded. But all cases who is not how it's not easy to classify who is the hard cases, who is not. But the cases where we also included us social welfare center, where we see the in majority cases husband calm down the situation, and we are every day call the sides to see is it good now to change and to react it, because if you reacted yesterday we have some cases who is reacted a third times, and in that case that guys will be immediately arrested, and in the first case will be proceeded and will be on a jail, on a detention center. Situation is not different all over the world. I listen to from Washington. Generally, I think the same. I think is good procedures, and also one more time I says, I think police is very. I know the police's job is police, but is not in good position in this process because we are human beings. We are all. I understand that police is also afraid to not be the poison for some cases if you enter in the houses and everything. And we are the great things, of course, the medical works, everybody, people who is working in the hospital, doctors. But I think it's also police have very, very, how to say, hard job to think also about this important issue. And definitely court, because one of the questions the previous you said about the advocates and lawyers, some of them, we have a problem because a lot of lawyers and advocates in our community, for example, in my town is very, how to say, very old people. When I say old, more than 16 years, and based on the procedures and based on recommendations from the municipality and the Ministry of the Health, says people who have more than 65 years is not possible going out. For that reason, the blocked to not possible to defend nobody. And for that reason, we are anxious on that. We have very good we have some lawyers who is younger and who understand and who is working pro bono, directly on the free legal aid, help the sides because understand the situation. Of course, everybody will have some positive sides and negative sides, but they have some few of them who is very good, who is younger, who understand, who is eligible to can work and help us to working with the police or prosecutor and everything.
As advocates, you're talking about those people are working with the police and prosecutors as advocates for the victims. Okay,
yes.
So
yes.
Very interesting. Thank you, Dusan. I think if I understood correctly, police do have the power to issue emergency orders in Kosovo, right? Is that right?
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
That is the same in Latvia, where they can issue the emergency orders. And I think, Iluta, if I understood correctly, you're in Latvia, they're still having some of the same problems with those emergency orders.
Actually, I think it's getting better and better every year because we do have, police has the right to issue emergency orders, and they do, and this amount of issued orders increases, and police also they can support women to apply for court for temporary protection measures that Ilze can describe more. But police, when they are at this, when they come and there is this emergency call, police can issue emergency order up to 8 days. And during these 8 days, women can apply to court for temporary protection measures, and court usually works very well, and Ilze can describe this more. But it increases, it's getting better, and it's getting better also this cross-institutional cooperation when police informs also social service providers. We still work to institutionalize this, to get this in the law, that they also inform social service providers, advocates about this issue, about these emergency orders, so that they can connect to the victims and provide support. But it's going on, it's working. It's not so quick, but it's improving. So Ilze could add more about these temporary protection measures.
Yes, I would love to hear from Ilze, and also if you could, either one of you could address. I thought you said in our previous conversations that you were experiencing some of the same things that Dusan described in Kosovo, that the police are so focused on curfew and enforcing the government restrictions due to COVID that they may not be, at least at this time, as focused as we would like them to be on the emergency orders. Is that accurate or not, Ilze? Or...
That's what we feel. That's what we see also in Latvia. That's what we see. The same time, they also report that they have more requests. They receive more emergency calls. So per day it's 32, and during this time last year it was 21, and per day, and they make around two restriction they issue 2 protection orders per day approximately. But it could be if you receive 32 emergency calls, you could have more emergency orders issued, isn't it right? So I hope that encouragement from Minister of Interior that is announced today will promote police activism in this regard.
Just going to say, boy, a real great example, we'll see if it works, of somebody in a very high level position making clear that emergency orders in domestic violence cases are at least as important as enforcing a curfew. Ilze, did you have anything to add to that from Latvia?
Yeah, a little bit. I add, if we compare percent application in court last year on March, it's approximately 25% increase. It's the same number like Cheryl said on start. It's I think it's overall this 25-30% pandemic time. And our protection order in court is unlimited. it's very good for victims because cancel this restriction order can only if asked one or other parties, and only court can cancel this order. And sometimes nobody go to court, and this order stay in force. And maybe it's a little bit problem because people thinking and feeling nihilismus about court decision. They become together, live together, but order is in force at the same time. It's not good. It's maybe we should think more about execution, this decision. Police explain more about consequences, about break rules. And about this application, a little bit more. I previously didn't say about, maybe not clearly say that hearing procedure in courts in this time is, in court session is exceptional. And according government declaration, court hearings priority is given to cases involving a significant violation of personal rights and objective urgency. No doubt, this definition include domestic violence cases. And Iluta today said that Interior Minister this explained for all public. And from my practice, if we are speaking in some cases, women filled this application, and as usually, she noticed only one this measure, leave home. But when we are looking to these circumstances, they treat by gun, and before he was convicted in bad behavior, and we decided that after assessing these cases, admitted that it is important not only for the perpetrator to leave the dwelling, but also a sanitary restraining order. It's very, very important for these cases.
I'm sorry, what?
Stay away, added new, and this in our civil procedure is good. We can put extra measures if from circumstances we see it's better for victim.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay, thank you, Ilze, very much. We have a really interesting comment here from somebody in, let's see, where did it go? In Dallas, the police can issue a 61-day emergency protective order when the abuser is arrested for the incident. That's really interesting. I did not know that. And then we have the question, is that any time or just during COVID? Any time. What if they are not arrested at the time of the offense? I think this is right. And then the answer is the victim doesn't get, I'm not sure if I've got that right, but let's just leave it at that. Really interesting to hear that a 61-day emergency protective order when the abuser is arrested for the incident. So that really does show the importance of that combination between that protective order and the criminal system. I would really like, thank you all so much. This is so helpful. I would love to hear from Erin Osborne about, you are preparing for an in-person hearing next week, I understand. Tell us about that, Erin. Some really interesting issues have come up.
Yeah, so our office is closed but working remotely, and we are still accepting cases from our partners, advocacy organizations, and our intake line is open. But we've been trying to prioritize, high lethality cases, cases where the issues are very complicated, and the petitioner likely will need the support of an attorney at the hearing. And so I am appearing on a case with reciprocal orders for protection. So one party filed using an online filing system that we have in Hennepin County called Guide and File, which allows people to fill out an order for protection online, but often without advocacy support. So they're just filling it out themselves. And then my client filed through an advocacy organization that referred her to me. The primary abuser filed first and was able to obtain custody of the children on an emergency basis. And so there is a hearing on Monday. And so to prepare for that remotely, the referral was made remotely to me. I've been preparing over the phone with my client. One of the benefits of being at the Domestic Abuse Service Center is that I have access to the state court, their filings. So the public doesn't have access to court filings from their homes. You have to actually go to the courthouse to look up documents if you want to see what was actually filed if you're not on the case yet. And so I do have access to the other parties' filings, those conflicting orders for protection. My client has been providing me with her evidence via email. And then in person on Monday, our court we always have separate waiting rooms for petitioners and respondents, but to increase social distancing, they have asked petitioners to go to the courtroom, just outside the courtroom, and then respondents are spreading out in the monitored waiting rooms that are on the first floor of our courthouse. I have acquired a mask that I can wear, and I do plan to wear that just to protect my client and myself as we are going to be in a waiting room. And our calendars are often, there are several cases scheduled at the same time. So there are often other people waiting at the courthouse with you. And so I do plan to keep that on until we go into the courtroom for our hearing, and then I'll take it off so that I'm clear on the record. But that is an initial hearing, and I'm hoping that we will be able to make legal arguments to sort out those emergency issues at the hearing. And then if there's going to be a trial, that we will be able to utilize some remote technology. Again, I'm hoping our court will acquire some video technology so that we can make that happen. And we do have some witnesses from out of state who are not going to be able to be there in person, which is often preferred by our court. But given the circumstances, they're in other states, they're not going to be able to travel for that hearing. So I am hoping that we will be able to have a trial remotely, hopefully not by phone. I think that would be challenging. I have had some hearings converted to phone hearings, and it's much more difficult to know who's talking, and we've been instructed to save objections to the end. So it changes the flow, and it certainly changes how we handle hearings.
So this was a case, let's just make sure we understand, where your client is a victim of violence?
Yes, significant violence, a history of violence. It was a situation where she was defending herself, and so the perpetrator called the police, showed them the scratches that he had, and then she was actually taken away in that situation. And then he was able to file a protective order first, despite about a decade of violence that had preceded this.
And he was able to obtain custody of the children
Yes, so you can get emergency custody in our orders, but then they do schedule a hearing that has to happen within, I believe it's 7 days. And so,
like Steve
yeah, and through her emergency order, because he obtained custody of a child that was not his, it was his stepchild. So she was able to get her child back, one of the children. So that at least is in place right now. She was also removed from her home where she was living and homeschooling her children. She's in a safe place right now, but these are the complicated issues that are coming up with these cases, and that's why they have to remain a priority, because if you can't access court services, there is no remedy available to you otherwise. So it really felt like something that we had to jump in on.
Well, excellent. I'm glad you did. Do any of the other panelists have thoughts on Erin's story? That one just came up in the last couple of days, didn't it, Erin?
Yeah.
Any thoughts on her?
Yes. Can I add?
Yes.
Can I say my thoughts? I just can confirm that something similar is going also in Latvia, and during this COVID time, we are many fake requests for temporary protection from violence to the courts, and we see this. We receive this information both from judges, but also from our specialists that work and support women here at Marta centers. And it appears that persons that are violent, they use this situation, they provoke women, and then they film them, and they are, unrestrained and acting hysterical, and then they request these temporary protection measures, saying that they are victims, and actually this woman is hysterical and bad mother and bad wife and so on. And actually, during this time, we see that such fake requests have increased.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you for that, Iluta. So interesting that these are common problems across borders.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Can I add a little bit? And this case, we are yesterday spoken with Iluta about this. This evidence can use in when we have cases about custody right, access right, and without context, what happened really at home, we can understand, because evidence is true. We can say this is false. False is same situation, provocative situation.
Thank you, Ilse.
That's why it's so important that both judges and other stakeholders, that they have this knowledge about nature of domestic violence and violence against women in general, that they have these gender lenses, and that they, in such receiving such materials, that they are eager to get more information to understand the whole situation before making some kind of decisions. Because usually court makes decision very quickly in Latvia. It's 24 hours to issue these temporary measures from violence. But in such cases, of course, I think it's necessary to have more, like prompt investigation.
Right. Yeah, it's such a good point, Iluta, that it's so important that courts understand how abusers can manipulate the court system itself, and be aware of that. And I think that's still new in many parts of the world, and in here at home too. I see that we're running out of time. I can't believe how fast this has gone.
Cheryl, may I add something?
Please do.
Quickly. Yeah. Okay, so first, following up on the comments that have just been made, one of the things that we tell judges all the time is that too often the judicial system is focused on what happened Saturday at 2 o'clock. And when you do that, you miss the whole history of the relationship. And it's so important to have all of that other background information so that you can put what happened at 2 o'clock on Saturday into the context of the full relationship. And that's, I think, what Iluta was talking about in terms of trying to get that background information and put on those gender lenses so you can see what's really going on. One other comment is I've now had at least one motion where in a domestic violence restraining order case where we've already been through the whole hearing and we had a final order, one of the parties then is concerned that the other party is not keeping social distancing for COVID-19 purposes and therefore wants to cut off visitation. And so we've had to deal with that as well. And I think that's also going to be something that's arising under this, as well as we've also now received a couple of motions. Our federal government is going to give $1,200 to adults and $500 for children. And we're seeing people filing for custody using that as one of the reasons, is that I want to get that money. And so it's, yeah, so I know. I said, well, that's chutzpah for you, but.
Oh, no kidding. That's amazing. Steve, you know, as long as we haven't really talked much about, and maybe our panelists could address this too, to the extent the arrests, you know, separate from the orders for protection, all of this obviously all woven together, but are you seeing, this is another dynamic that I've heard about from New York and other places, that there is a hesitancy among courts and judges in the criminal process. If a high-level offender, for example, or a low-level offender is arrested and brought in for pretrial proceedings, are they increasingly being released due to the COVID-19 concerns about the jails? And
well, yeah, I can only talk. Yeah, I can only talk about our court because I don't know what other courts are doing around that. Yeah. But for us, it's really so it's an individualized determination and what is the level of risk that the jail is willing to take with this person. So is this person, you know, 70 years old, and so we have an elder abuse case? Is this person already autoimmune disease? Do they already have, you know, a cold or other kinds, showing other kinds of symptoms? They would then actually be probably screened out and not even put into jail in the first place. And then we're trying to do the same kind of thing in court. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has issued a memorandum saying that tribal jails should recommend to tribal courts that only people who have violent crimes should be left in jail and everybody else should be released. But at least on our reservation, the use of heroin and methamphetamine is as big a problem as violence is. And for some of those people, actually being in jail probably makes them less at risk for COVID-19 and certainly at less risk for overdosing than if they were released. So again, we're trying to look at each individual and make those kinds of determinations. And so the prosecutors are not asking me to release people at this point.
Interesting. Okay. Do other panelists have any comment about that as far as the criminal process goes and the inclination of courts or to release defendants that you might be concerned are very high risk? No other comments? Okay.
Yeah, I one last follow-up on that, because I think, so one of the, there basically is, at least in most United States courts, there's two reasons you could hold somebody with bail. One is whether or not they're going to come back to court. And the second is whether or not they're going to be a risk to the victim or the community. And clearly, these people, especially like you were saying, the high risk people, they're at risk both to the community at large and obviously to the victim. And so I think one of the things you have to try to balance is what is the risk of them getting COVID-19 while they're in jail versus what is the risk of further physical violence and or lethality if they are released, particularly because we know that being arrested and thrown in jail is actually going to increase the level of violence and lethality rather than decrease it. So I think that's a balancing act that courts have to take into account.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Thank you, Steve. We just have a few minutes left. I can't believe it. So I would really love to give Laura, does this sound like a good time to do this? Chime in here. Do you have any questions you think we should address to the panelists from the chat box, Laura?
Nazika has been monitoring the questions, so I'm going to ask her to jump in and add any questions.
Yeah, I feel like you all did a really good job of addressing the questions during the PowerPoint and as it made sense. I don't at this time see any lingering questions.
Okay.
But we do save the chat transcripts and they will be shared with the panelists and we can get answers out to you if we happen to miss your question.
Yes, and please don't hesitate. We've been trying to really be responsive to questions coming in after the webinars too. So I would love to give you all as our panelists one last opportunity to speak and address anything you would like to that you haven't had a chance to yet. Maybe we could start, Dusan, anything you would like to say in closing with Dusan from Kosovo?
Of course, one more time, thanks a lot for the opportunity, and it's our pleasure to be there with the experts all over the world. The sentences was very important. Stay home because situation can be worse. More we have, how to say, all over the world we have a problem. I hope will be soon finished. I hope until the May will be everything normal from the June to back in the normal our life and fight for the domestic violence, fight for the rights, fight for the rights for everybody in this world. And we are here to have our better life. Thank you one more time to be the part of that, and it's a big pleasure to do more things in the future. We need our helps and our expertise in this period, and of course in the future cooperation in this topic.
Thank you, Dusan, so much. Erin, maybe you could go next. Do you have any final comments you'd like to make or anything you missed that you'd like to say? We'll be so interested to hear how you're hearing those.
Yeah, I just want to touch on what my office has been working on in the last week. I think with all of the remote work, it feels like we are more isolated than ever, but our communities are still there and we can still reach out to our advocacy communities. And so my office has sort of divided up the advocacy communities in Hennepin County, and all of the staff attorneys are reaching out to make sure that they know we're here, we're taking cases, we want to be available to you, and to find out, maybe their needs are changing right now as well. And some of the advocacy organizations are connected to shelters, and so they're really on the front lines of this right now, and their needs may just be different right now. But we want to know, how those needs are changing and how we can be helpful. And so just remembering we're all in this together, and we're all kind of experiencing the same issues, but we can support each other and help each other through it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin. So Ilze, would you like to say something final?
Thank you. I think this our meeting is like act of solidarity. And it's very important to make stronger this zero tolerance against violence in society. And women and children who suffer from domestic violence must be confident that they will be heard and helped. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. It's just wonderful to have you. So we have left Steve, would you like to, any final comments?
Sure. I also want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this, and thank my fellow panelists. It's wonderful meeting you and working with you. And I just want to say to everybody that's on, thank you for all the work that you're doing out there across the world in helping to protect women. And I just think it's so important for us to keep in mind that part of, even though our focus oftentimes is so much on women, that we also need to be working with men in terms of accountability. And not only, I mean, and we also know that some men are victims as well, but in terms of perpetrators, to be working with them in terms of holding them accountable and not letting them use COVID-19 as an excuse to either abuse more, or some of the examples where they're getting using it as a weapon in terms of getting protection orders. So again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Steve. So important. Yes. Iluta, would you like to have the final closing comments?
Yes, I just want to say that we have to acknowledge that this is us actually that can help women, and not only us, but we have to encourage police and also bystanders, especially bystanders, to act if they witness violence, because women currently are really like prisoners in this situation, and it's not so that they can do something much about their situation. So all the persons around can do something, and this is something that we have to encourage and we have to do so that we can help further on. Yeah, thank you for this. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. We just feel so much. We felt this instantly at Global Rights for Women, that we have to keep talking and keep our movement of solidarity moving forward for victims of violence, because as we know, this is a pandemic within a pandemic. So I greatly appreciate all of you being here with us, and all of your work, and all of the participants online. Thank you for joining us. All of our webinars are on our website. Steve mentioned how important accountability for perpetrators is, and we've done several series on batters intervention programs that have been fabulous, and they are on our website. There are links to them, and they have been recorded. So,
Cheryl?
Yes.
Can you also talk just very briefly about the French pharmacies?
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. This goes right to what Iluta was saying about how the creative solutions that people are coming up with, because of the concern that women are not reporting and unable to come out from under the oppression and subjugation at home. One of the essential services that is open in France, of course, like many places, is pharmacies. So the French the government, I think it is, they have advertised that the password mask 19, and they have trained pharmacists to understand that if a woman comes to the counter and says mask 19, that is a code word for she needs help. So they're putting that system into place out of concern that women's ability to access help. So, just really creative solutions are coming up, and that remains our commitment to really be engaging with you all as we go forward, and learning about these creative solutions and communicating them around the world so that all of you compassionate, dedicated, brilliant people out there can find ways to develop best practices in your own community that seed might be planted from another community. Thank you, Steve, for reminding me of that. So we will close there. Again, thank you so much. We're just really grateful for the solidarity. And stay safe and healthy, everyone. Bye-bye.